Hello, this is Coding Gicha for full-stack developers. So far I've explained how to install and service Nginx and PHP FPM on an Ubuntu environment. However, the workspace path for development differs and it's not suitable for development using inide. Let's set up a PHP development environment using Visual Studio Code as inide. When developing a web application, localhost is often used as the URL address. However, if you develop multiple web applications, you have to modify the web document root directory each time you develop, and there is a disadvantage in that you can only run one web application at a time. Of course, if you're developing with a separate web application server, like Java, you only need to run one web application, so localhost is fine. However, if you're developing with PHP, registering a development host makes development much easier. To distinguish it from the production host, I'll use -dev as the development host. Currently, the host of the www secondary domain and the host of the gurum secondary domain are registered in the gicha.org domain. On Linux, the web document management directory is separated from the directory where the web server is installed. By default, the web document management directory is /var/www, but I personally prefer to change it to /var/web when serving on a production server. However, in a development environment, it should be managed under the user's home directory. Linux has strict user permissions, so files can only be edited with the user's login privileges if they're in the user's home directory. I prefer to manage development-related files in the dev directory under the user's home directory. I'll create development-related directories, such as workspace, under the dev directory. I'll also configure the workspace directory to allow multiple workspaces. Projects covered in Coding Gicha will be managed in the Codings directory. If you are using a host other than localhost for PHP development, it is more intuitive to use the host name as the project name. PHP is a language that doesn't require compilation, making development lightweight. Therefore, a structure with the primary domain as project and secondary domains as subdirectories won't be too heavy. Since PHP doesn't require compilation, there's no need to separate the source directory. However, to separate the test and implementation sources, I'll create a web apps directory under src. It's also a good idea to manage various meeting and design documents together under the project directory, rather than separately. I'll develop hosts corresponding to the www and gurum secondary domains under the src/web apps directory. Let's examine the overall structure of the gicha.org project directory. Let's modify the Nginx site configuration file to match the project directory structure of the development environment. Open the gurum.gicha.org site configuration file. I'll modify the web document root directory of the gurum.gicha.org host to match the development environment. I'm also planning to make a video that implements the source code of the currently running gurum.gicha.org from scratch, so I'll leave only the basic settings and remove any additional settings. I'll also remove the extension-based MVC pattern settings. Based on the gurum.gicha.org site configuration, I'll configure the www.gicha.org site. I'll modify the server name to the www secondary domain. The primary domain is typically served the same way as the www secondary domain. I'll modify the www secondary domain's web document root directory to match the development environment. I'll set the server name for the 80 basic protocol to be the same as the one set for the 443 security protocol. Even if the www secondary domain and the primary domain are served the same way, sessions will differ because the hosts are different. This means that if you log in or configure the www secondary domain, this information won't be reflected in the primary domain. To prevent sessions from changing depending on the host, there is a way to forward requests to the primary domain to the www secondary domain. I'll leave www.gicha.org as the server name for Security Protocol 443 and forward requests to gicha-dev.org to www.gicha-dev.org. Ultimately, requests to the www secondary domain will be forwarded, so I'll configure requests to the 80 primary protocol to be routed directly to the www secondary domain. I'll configure requests using the 443 security protocol to be forwarded to the www secondary domain if the host is the primary domain. In the Sites Enabled directory, I'll create a symbolic link file for the www.gicha.org site configuration file. The Nginx web server process user is www.data. This is causing permissions issues in the IDE tool. Let's change it to the login user account. Let's reload the Nginx web server service. I also need to set the PHP account to the login user account. Let's also change the PHP FPM process user to the login user account. Let's also change the listening owner account, which will accept connections from the web server, to the login user account. Let's restart the PHP FPM service. I also need to change the PHP error log to the login user account so that logs can be recorded. It took some time to configure it for the development environment. Now, let's cover how to implement a web application with PHP in Visual Studio Code. Let's load the gicha.org project folder. Check Trust for the parent folder to be used as the workspace and agree to the trust agreement. Currently, there's only one project called gicha.org, but I'll be adding more projects as I develop, so let's save it as a workspace. The gicha.org project was the root folder, but now that the Codings workspace has become the root folder, the gicha.org project should appear under it, but it doesn't appear immediately. The project folder only appears when you expand and collapse the workspace root folder. I'll write an example that displays the date in a localized format, according to the locale and time zone on the www secondary domain. PHP was originally designed to be written within HTML files to create dynamic web pages. To separate PHP sections from HTML, the syntax is written between opening angle bracket $PHP and closing angle bracket. However, it's more common to write PHP and HTML code in separate files, and it's recommended to omit the closing angle bracket in files containing only PHP code. Here, locale and time zone are declared and used as variables. If they are passed as parameters and processed according to the client environment, the output can be output in a format more suitable for the user environment. I'll use various date formats in the timestamp. PHP's date format doesn't support locale, but the International Date Formatter object is a newly added object for locale-based internationalized date formatting and parsing. The International Date Formatter object requires the international module. PHP's date format uses standard PHP patterns, but the International Date Formatter object also allows for the use of ICU patterns. These days, it's more common to write PHP code and HTML in separate files, but for the sake of time, I'll also write the HTML syntax. As mentioned earlier, if used in an HTML template, closing angle bracket is also required to delimit PHP sections. I'll call the PHP page using a web browser. I'll request a page with the primary domain. Instead of displaying the date, a 500 error is displayed. As mentioned earlier, this is because the international module is not installed. I'll address the international module error later. Let's check whether the page request to the primary domain is properly forwarded to the www secondary domain. Chrome omits the scheme from the requested address and displays it. It also hides the www secondary domain. Clicking the address bar only reveals the actual requested address. It has been successfully forwarded to the www secondary domain. These days, the use of the HTTPS security protocol is mandatory, so displaying the scheme is unnecessary. However, hiding the www secondary domain seems like an excessive minimalism. Rather, it tends to interfere with the display of correct information, and as a result, the process of verifying the actual address tends to become longer and more cumbersome. When an error occurs, you can't see the detailed error, and only a 500 error message is displayed. However, you can find more detailed information in the error log file. You can also display errors in a web browser without checking the error log. In a production environment, it's best to disable the display of errors for security reasons, but in a development environment, it's a good idea to display them directly in a web browser. Open the php.ini file. Change display errors to on. Restart PHP FPM. Refresh the web browser. Now, you can see detailed errors directly in the web browser without checking the log file. Errors displayed on the screen expose the server environment to the user. Furthermore, the absolute path of the PHP file is also exposed. In a production environment, you should turn display errors off. Viewing the error log in a separate window and tool can be somewhat confusing. Let's configure Visual Studio Code to view the error log in real time. I'll install the Log Viewer extension for Visual Studio Code. I'll set up a log viewer watch. Set the title to something that clearly indicates that this is a PHP log. Since Nginx integrates PHP with PHP FPM, you need to view the PHP log, not the web server log. When you click on the log viewer in the activity bar on the left, the PHP log you set up earlier will be displayed in the list. Double-clicking it will display the log in real time. When working on source code, it would be nice if the log was shown in the panel area at the bottom, but it is shown in the editor area along with the source code. I'll move the log to the bottom of the editor area. I'll reduce the height of the log area to display more of the source code. Because interactive actions can't be entered in the log results, the currently displayed log is difficult to distinguish from previous logs. A buffer equal to the screen height is created at the bottom. By scrolling the log and bringing the last line to the top, you can distinguish it from previous logs. Let's refresh the screen without fixing the error. Now, even if no errors are displayed in the web browser, you can check errors in real time using the log viewer. Even though this is a development environment, if you find sensitive error information annoying to see on the screen, you can turn off display errors without any inconvenience. The log viewer extension displays log results in the editor area, so you have to move the log tab and adjust its height every time. The lack of interactive functionality is also a bit inconvenient. On Linux, using the tail command may be more convenient than the log viewer extension. Passing the path to the PHP error log file every time you run the tail command can be a bit cumbersome. Let's write a shell script that tails the PHP log to the specified path. The tail command displays the last 10 lines by default. In fact, we're more interested in logs added in real time than previous logs. Mixing them with older logs can be confusing. I'll hide older logs. Let's grant execute permission. Let's close the log viewer extension. Let's open a terminal panel. Let's run the shell script command I wrote earlier. Let's reload the screen without fixing the error. An error will be displayed in the terminal console. The Linux terminal allows interactive actions by default, so you can separate the log from previous logs by entering blank lines and separators. Reloading the error screen makes it easy to compare previous logs and focus on the current log. The Windows terminal doesn't support interactive actions and doesn't natively provide the tail command. Therefore, while the log viewer extension is useful on Windows, using the terminal panel may be more useful on Linux. Now, to prevent errors, let's install the international module. Most languages install modules through their respective package managers and manage them in a project management tool. However, PHP typically installs modules through the System Package Manager, so you need to install the international module using apt. Let's restart PHP FPM. Let's refresh the web page. The data is now displayed correctly in various formats without errors. While viewing PHP's error log while developing can be quite useful, Xdebug makes debugging in PHP development even more convenient. Next time I'll cover how to install Xdebug and configure it for debugging in Visual Studio Code. Thank you for watching.